So years ago, when I first started teaching speech class, before we had speech 2, one of the first speeches I had students do was a speech called the show and tell speech. Sounds exactly like what it is. Just like in kindergarten, you bring in an object and you talk about why it's significant to you. So they could tell a little story about the object or who gave it to them or what they really liked about it. It was a fun speech because it helped introduce people. We now do the introduction speech as well, but you will have the option to do show and tell for this next speech that we're going to be doing, which is a PV Legs practice speech. Anyhow, so when I used to do this show and tell speech, the administration was clear. We had a different principal then. Our principal was real clear that yes, students can bring in an animal for their show and tell speech if they filled out this form from the office. And it was literally a form that said at the top, permission to bring live animal into FHS. And you had to detail like who you were, what hour you wanted to bring the animal, that kind of thing, like what purpose it was. And kids would complete this, hand it in, and then be allowed to bring in their pet. Typically, people brought in dogs, but we did start to see toward the end some even more exotic fare, some birds, some snakes, that kind of thing. It was really fun at first, like I said, to have people talking about their animals, and a lot of students, you got to see a different side of them, like with their dog. You got to see a different loving side. It was pretty fun. Eventually, I had to shut down the animal part of this speech. I had to shut down letting kids bring in their animals. It just got to be too much. We had a couple of dogs who acted like dogs, barking at one another. It was getting so crowded with how many students wanted to bring their animal in that it was getting really tricky to schedule it. So you would have like 2 dogs in an hour, and it's too much. Dogs are territorial. They would start barking at one another. You don't need that in a school. Can you imagine what it was like for Ms. Fedora to be teaching and next door there's barking? Yikes. So I shut it down. After I shut it down, the funny thing is, it was after I'd already decided and already made it policy, like, yeah, guys, we're done with this. Talk to the students. After that is when the principal got all riled up about it, just kind of funny. And the reason why he got riled up is one day he was in class observing me because I was a newer teacher. That's what happens. And this student, unbeknownst to me, had brought in his pet snake. I believe it was just a coral snake. So it was just a little thing. And it was curled up in his hoodie. So that's why I didn't know it was there. Apparently, that's where the snake liked to be. He liked to sleep on the back of this kid's neck. So he had brought it in earlier before this policy change. While I was teaching, this snake comes slithering out of this kid's hoodie. And oh man, principal lost it. Like, normally, when principals observe, they don't say anything because, they're there to watch you handle things, watch the lesson. But he couldn't help himself. He's saying, Copeland, you're running a zoo here. You can't be having these animals. And I didn't see the snake at first until he started with the yelling. So it was quite a day. It was pretty funny. I still laugh thinking about him referring to my classroom as the C207 Zoo. For weeks after that, he was like, I can't believe you let that kid bring in a snake. And I had to keep correcting him. Like, no, I changed the policy. That was an unlicensed snake. That's not my snake, man. It was a good time though. And I think of that time fondly.